Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast. My name is Tom Luongo, and today I have part 3, Return of the Jedi, as it were, of my interview with investigative journalist and host of Radio Sputnik's morning radio program Fault Lines, Lee Stranahan. So without further ado, here's Lee.
The flaw with it is, I saw a good speech by somebody that started with him saying, a lot of people say, well, the government doesn't care about what I think. They don't care about what I think. And he's like, no, all they care about is what you think. There are people who spend all day just trying to determine the content of your head. All they care about is what you think. Here's a question, and look for this, maybe I'm missing one. I have seen people who fell for Bill Browder's story, who then turned and realized the truth and are now anti-Bill Browder, right? I have found no one who was anti-Bill Browder who then learned more and suddenly became pro-Bill Browder. I have found not one person I've ever met who's like, because whatever you do, you find people, I used to be a Mormon or whatever you are. That doesn't make any difference, right? So I used to be a Christian Scientist and then whatever, okay. So you've never found anyone who goes, I used to think Bill Browder was lying about this entire story, but then I saw the truth and I realized that Bill Browder.
There ain't that many ciphers, right? The guys who jack out of the Matrix and then know the stake is bullshit and still wants to go back.
That's right.
No one wants to go back. Once you're red pilled, once you're out, you can't unsee what you've seen.
And from a business perspective, I see a real problem there, which is as more people go in one direction and never come back,
I see very few people who I see some single issue voters, by the way. Right, not systemic thinkers, but single issue voters are easy. They're easy ones to kind of convert to libertarianism and then see them fall back. If they're single issue voters on abortion or open borders or equal right or the environment or whatever, if they're single issue voters, that's all that triggers them. Then, if you can explain it to them when it's not a crisis moment, you can probably get them into libertarian circles but they'll always fall back to, well, that's not going to protect. I have too much fear, and that's not going to protect my thing enough. And then they always fall back to where they were. I've seen this dozens of times. But if you get somebody who's a systemic thinker, and Jonathan Haidt has done a great study on the differences between liberals, self-identified liberals, conservatives, and now libertarians. He's the only one who's actually done this on libertarians. Finds that the libertarians in general, the ones who self-identify and stay as self-identified, tend to be more systemic, holistic thinkers. Right, they think systemically. They don't think issue by issue, and which perfectly describes me because that's what I do. I can't not think about things systemically. The systemic effects of a particular policy or rule or change or whatever. And again, I'm also a chemist. State function, so like state functions, I kind of get. So that kind of thing. Those are the people that once they jack out, then you'll never get them back. And they're also the ones that become the most freaking dogmatic about not going back and about keeping everybody on the straight and narrow and saying, no, fuck you. You can't change my mind. Because because I can see you. Because by the way, I don't want to unsee you pulling on your levers.
Right. No, that's right.
Levers. I don't want to unsee it because I don't want to live in that world.
And they don't even see. And by the way, with the Cavanaugh nomination, it's a perfect example. They don't understand that with every one of these things, there's an attrition rate. Mm-hmm. Because Garland's argument this week was, well, it's just politics, which is a whole nother. No, it's not, but okay. But my point was, okay, let's go with that argument that it's just politics. You better win then. And it was obvious that they were not going to have a clear win. If they win, it was going to be a squeaker, right? So if you understand the military, you go in with a superior force, which they did not have a voting thing. So if you want to be vicious, at least do it. At least if you're going to be vicious, at least win. Because being vicious and saying it's all politics, when you lose, all those screaming people and everything else, some of them are going to get more mad, but some of them are just going to they're done.
Right.
You spent them.
They're gonna look at you. They're gonna look at you like, okay, you guys are bad at what you do.
Yeah.
And you're going to lose, and you pick up the Jordan Peterson thing again. They're going to lose in the dominance hierarchy because you were. This is kind of what I was saying earlier about the Republican senators, right? Trump is now establishing himself by the way this has been handled, and Grassley established himself as the top of the new dominance hierarchy. It's no longer Dianne Feinstein.
Yeah.
It's no longer Chuck Schumer. It's no longer Pelosi. They're not in charge anymore. And once they're no longer in charge and someone else takes their place, Katie barred the door. This is why Paul Ryan is not running for re-election, because he knew he wouldn't be able to stand up to a challenge to his speakership.
Well, I was okay? So one of the most brilliant. Well, I'll tell you, a lot of this to me is I really think we're in a fundamentally different era, and so. Mm-hmm. So because of technology, I think you have to
Oh yeah, I mean Judge Knapp 10 years ago said the camera's the new gun.
Yeah. Well, and one of the most brilliant political philosophy documents in the past year is underrated. Is Dave Chappelle's Netflix special, The Bird Revelation, and I haven't seen it. It's a comedy special that's ostensibly about the Me Too movement. And he released it in the middle of the Me Too movement stuff going on, which was really smart. But he talks about some stuff in there that's very, very deep as well. He talks about COINTELPRO, and he talks about why he left for 12 years and moved to South Africa. But he doesn't really talk about it, but he gives you some clues. He talks about it, but he doesn't really talk about it. But he talks about the Me Too movement a lot. And it really does relate to this thing that we're both talking about, which is there's an awakening thing happening. And it's happening so quick, people quite don't know how to deal with it. And one of the biggest things he says there is, in a brilliant sequence, he says, look, he said, I'm with you, ladies, on the Me Too thing. I'm with you. He understands sexual assault against women is a horrible thing, and right. it's been pervasive, and it has been put up with a nod and a wink for way too long, and blah blah blah. But he also understands that women lie and women use that, and those are the realities of the situation that believe all women never take into account. And he says, look, the solution for what's happening in Los Angeles is South Africa. He said after the apartheid fell, by all standards, it should have been a bloodbath. He said, but they realized that a corrupt system, the people who participate in that system are victims of that system. So if you just have a bloodbath, you don't get a lasting peace. And right. And he says, so what's required is people to explain their role in that system, to be honest about what they did and what had happened. And that's the only way to move forward to a lasting peace. And I feel that way about elites. In other words, my goal is I don't want the classic response to elites is let's go to the palace, pull them out and hang them. Right. Right. And that shit never works. Castro.
I know. As I'm Sicilian, so I say string them up by their toenails, feed them to dogs over the Washington reflecting pool.
But it never works.
But I know it doesn't work.
It doesn't work. It never works. And the reason, and I use Castro as an example because Castro was not a communist at first. He was sort of on the fence. His brother Raul was a communist, but he'd be asking interviews. Or Ho Chi Minh, who reached out to Truman when Vietnam was trying to break away from France, thinking that letter, you can find it. Ho Chi Minh quoting the Declaration of Independence going, we, like you, are a colony trying to break away from an empire, and we want your support. Nothing. We didn't do anything. We don't help them because now we're hooked up with the colony because now England's pulled us back into their orbit. And that's what's happening. But my solution is not to hang them, because with Castro what happened was, of course, it was valid. What he was fighting for initially was completely valid. But then he gets power, and then he controls the government, and then all the corruption starts and everything after that. And that's when the people think he's betrayed the revolution, which in fact he did betray the revolution. It wasn't supposed to be about giving him power, but but the U.S. almost, I would argue, pushed Castro into that because we never backed him. In the same way, I think we almost pushed Ho Chi Minh
into the same situation.
Into the same situation.
Look, I mean, look, the United States Revolution was betrayed by Hamilton, who wanted to replace King George with King George.
Right.
From King George III to King George Washington, because Hamilton was a royalist, and he eventually won.
Yeah,
he won. The Constitution is, I mean, relatively speaking, the Constitution is relative to the Articles of Confederation. The Constitution is horrible. What they didn't do was consolidate the debt. Martin Armstrong makes this point all the time. Had the Articles of Confederation been just strong enough to consolidate the debt under one rubric, they would have been able to get. They probably would have survived. In the same way that's why the European Union is going to fail, because they've got. You know, I the easiest way for me to describe it to people is, what if Illinois, to cover their pension debt, could issue U.S. Treasury bonds?
Right. Yeah.
They can't. Right. And this is what Italy's been doing. But then again, but that thing is deeper than that, and it's a very difficult subject to try and explain to people, right? Because it takes a long time, and you're stepping on people's sensibilities, like especially in this case, especially Germans, who have been benefiting egregiously by the system, and they don't understand why. Right. They don't understand that the euro is undervaluing their labor, which is giving them an advantage in the marketplace, but it's overvaluing their labor and overvaluing Italian labor and undervaluing theirs. And that's why the single currency system doesn't work. But how do you explain that to a German voter? Right. I mean, you can't. Right. And how do you explain it to an American voter that how do you explain to them Triffin's paradox and the world's reserve currency and how we utilize that for so many other reasons? And how do you explain that when you've got a president who has a 17th century view on trade? Okay.
Yeah.
Trump. Right. And it's all a mess. But so what you try and do is just one. But your point is well taken about, we have to figure out a way to do this without doing as little harm as possible. So while we all want retribution against Soros for all the evil shit he's done in his life, and I'd like nothing more than to put pay-per-view cameras up in the Russian prison that they throw him in, while he he dies, and we balance the budget with the money. That's not the way it's going to work.
Well, see, I have my fantasy. I've tried to think of the Endgame that would work. And again, this does not conform to anyone's ideology. So there's arguments that could be made constitutionally and legally and everything else. But I'll be honest, I think this would work, which is you just say, okay, you get a coalition of enough people to basically sign a petition that says, hey, there's more of us than there are of you, so we want to tell you something if you're a billionaire elitist. First, all that whole king and monarchy thing, that's all over with. That's done. We're not going to do that anymore. And if you have more than a certain amount, and we'd figure out what that number is, $2 billion or something like that, we're just going to take half your money. And you should go along with this, because otherwise there's a lot more of us. Remember that part? And we will kill you. And we don't want to kill you, but we will. But I want you to think about the other side of this deal. You'll still have far more money than you ever possibly need for anything. So we've left you with that. So the deal is so obvious. You're going to have you're still going to have $4 billion or whatever the number is, right?
Right.
And then what you do is, and then you say to the weapons industry, and you need to cut this shit out too. We're shutting down the weapons industry because war is the ultimate tool of elitism. War is
the health of the state.
That's right. And we're shutting this down. But you guys still get to make cool stuff. You can make fireworks or droid toys or whatever. There's a lot of cool technology you have.
Hey, there's plenty of personal weapons that people want to own and go to the freaking gun range with.
That's right. Okay? That's right. That's right. Just have at it. That'll be fun. And just a couple other points, and just go look, we're not going to kill him with no tanks. We're not trying to do that, but this is not working, and we need to do a reset, because we all actually know that it's not, that parts of it aren't working, and well,
that's what's coming. The Great Reset's coming, whether we like it or not.
Krieger's talked about a debt jubilee, which I like the idea of too.
Yeah, no, that idea has been bandied around in hard money circles from Jim Rickards to Steve Keen for a decade now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I haven't discussed it a lot, but I know that Krieger's still bringing that one up and a lot of things. And yeah, there's a way out of this where you just and it's been done before. It'll be done again. But at this point, these guys have all the power, and they still think they have the right to have the power. This is the problem.
Yeah.
Guys like Soros have a God complex, which is why unfortunately, he's not going to leave the stage willingly. You're not going to be able to have the conversation with him with, okay, you're just going to give me all your money. This is why I say at some point, or you're going to give me half your money or a third of it or whatever, and we're going to write off the debt and we're going to do all this. That's not going to happen. What's going to happen is they're going to fight and they're going to fight and they're going to fight because they don't know how not to, and because they think they're better than us. That's the biggest problem, and it's going to wind up badly, Lee. I hate to tell you this. I'm going to fight otherwise, but the cycle of history is that it's going to end badly.
So it's possible, but I'm telling you, I see an Endgame where I go, you know what? Really? See, here's the thing. The other thing you can't do. See, here's the other problem with these hedge fund managers like Soros is the guy's a genius, right? So in fact, the reason a lot of hedge fund managers end up doing these political things is, in fact, hedge fund managers are much smarter than people who work at McDonald's and now might sign a petition for a $15 an hour minimum wage, not knowing that would mean the end of their jobs. And so these people who run things, the elites, the thing about them is they actually understand stuff a lot better than the average. I'm not one of those people who romanticizes the working class.
Right.
These people.
You're not a Marxist, Lee.
That's right. No, a lot. And these hedge fund billionaires. I've been reading Ray Diallo's book, Principles. Mm-hmm. Boy, that guy's smart. And the left, one of their big problems is they think the elites just have the money because they were giving it to them. And they also don't understand what any parent understands, which is if you don't give your kids you have to balance it between give them some space, but give them some motivation, but and
give them boundaries.
And the fact is, we have debates on the show about minimum wage. They're talking about livable wage. I'm like, you know what? A entry-level McDonald's job they don't even want you there for 20 years. They know that you're going to get sick of it, get some skills, and leave in a year. Right. They know that. That's built into their business model. It's not supposed to be livable. It's supposed to be like you do it when you're 18, so you learn to show up to a job on time and blah blah blah. Right? And if you even learn
it's a paid internship. It's not a job. It's a paid internship.
And you could for free learn customer service skills that would allow you to get hired as a waiter, for instance. You wouldn't have to spend a single dime and just learn to go, hey, welcome to McDonald's. My name's Lee. Can I help you? And if you can do that well and articulately and not hit customers, you can be a waiter and suddenly your income is double, right?
Right.
And blah, blah, blah. And so they never, as soon as I talk about that kind of practical stuff, about like nothing's keeping it, they're just like, oh, well, no, I would just far rather have, the trick is, like I'm okay in a sense, in theory, with having a guaranteed income in the sense of, like, I don't like the idea of people dying and stuff like that. But then no one ever talks about the difficult parts, which is someone says, a lot of homeless people are homeless because that's honestly the choice. No one wants to say this. That's the choice that they're making. And it's for a complex series of reasons that may involve what some people would call mental illness, but that they might call some consistency in thinking, or they don't, blah, 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 right? Like, so I don't even like putting that on it. But what do you do when someone wants to opt out? I don't want it. No, I don't want to work. So if do you have no work requirements? If you have no work requirements, then some people work harder than others. And liberals just like never, ever, they never want to explain to me, well, what do you do if $15, I said, okay, let's assume I'm going to go along with you. How do you know that's the number? Because you don't. And,
and the other thing is that we don't know that because we live in an age where the pricing system, the whole pricing model system, is completely garbage. It's garbage in equals garbage out. The central banks have so thoroughly distorted the pricing system, and I could put on my Austrian economist hat for the next 45 minutes and try to explain this stuff, but I'm not going to do that now. But just say they've so thoroughly cocked everything up. I have argued this with friends who were outraged about healthcare costs. I'm like, we used to have the best healthcare system in the world in this country. You had catastrophic healthcare in case you broke a leg and needed to go to the emergency room or got cancer, and you paid for everything out of pocket. back in the 50s, and it cost an
Right.
uneducated day laborer 3 days' wages to go and have an appendectomy, which at that point was major surgery. Today, this is Harry Brown's numbers from 2000, that cost a professional like a doctor or a lawyer 3 months' wages to have an outpatient surgery. We're not even talking the same thing anymore.
Well, this is what. By the way, this goes back to to what I was saying about about Cecil Rhodes and De Beers. This is why De Beers is so significant. Here's you talk about the Matrix and pulling the lid off. What the question is? What is the Matrix? Like, what is the big illusion people have? I think one of the big illusions people have is scarcity.
Right.
Scarcity is a creation.
Scarcity of time is not a creation.
It's of some things, yes, but time it's not. But
time is the only true scarce natural resource. I say this all the time.
And the reason the De Beers thing is so interesting is it involves setting up secret societies and stuff that still exists today. Then it involves South Africa, so it involves issues of race. It involves empire, because that's for the British Empire. And it involves De Beers, which as recently as a couple of decades ago, were saying in court, we keep artificial scarcity because we're trying to keep a monopoly. They literally they're very open about it.
Right.
We're creating, and their argument was, well, we're helping see, if people realized that there's no scarcity of diamonds and that they could be priced at 100th of what they are, the people who've already bought diamonds, would
freak out.
Which is the elitist, right? Suddenly their diamonds would lose value. And so they're like, well, we're doing a public service by keeping,
prices high.
So
that's the same argument the central banks made about bailing out all the friggin' banks.
That's right.
We're protecting your 401k, the value of your 401k.
Right.
Well, no, not if all prices drop by 90% and your portfolio value only drops by 70%. You just made 20% of your money. You know who loses 95% in that scenario? The people who are the most over-levered, because they lose 95 to 100% of their money, and they're the ones who are politically connected. See, this is the part that everybody misses. It's not how much money you have, it's what your money buys you.
Right.
It's purchasing power is important. That's why when people yell at me and say, well, why do you go on and on and on about Russia? Russia's got lower GDP than Canada. No, they don't. When it's priced in dollars, but Russians buy things in rubles. Right. And when you normalize GDP on a per capita basis for purchasing power parity purposes, the Russians at this point in time right now have a better GDP per capita than Germany does.
Well, the other thing I try to and this is where like I say, to me, I keep everything I do is just through this lens that we had once in a planet technological revolution 10 years ago, and a lot of stuff has not caught up to that because it's such a big revolution that we can't deal with it. But people talk about how much more expensive things are, and I'll go, dude, when I grew up, if I could spend $20 a week on albums, I would get 2 albums. Now I'm carrying around every song ever recorded in my pocket at all times. I'm like, I don't know how to measure that cost. So in other words, right. So in other words,
how do you measure the value, and how do you measure the value creation? How do you measure it? I agree.
They love to do these things where they go like, well, here's what a hamburger cost in 1910 compared to what it costs today, right? So here's what every song in the world costs, right? I mean, I have Spotify. I'm paying like $8 a month for every song basically ever recorded, right?
Right.
Okay. So what would that have cost me in $1980? Right? You can't measure it. And
no,
so
you can't because the cost of the wire for distribution of music dropped to zero.
Or the stuff I know personally that I could put a cost on, which is, because I've been in the video field, I worked in TV and film for so long, what's the cost of a remote TV truck capable of transmitting with a 4K camera, blah, 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 in $1980, like, well, first off, it wouldn't have been that high resolution, but let's go with, $4 million, right? So that's your iPhone. You just do a periscope. Right. Oh, look, it's a high-def camera. It's a TV truck. I'm carrying around a TV truck in my pocket, along with the Tower Records. Oh, not just Tower Records. All the records.
Oh,
by the
and
way,
the
all
Library of
books.
Alexandria.
That's exactly right.
And the Library of Alexandria.
No, that's exactly right. And every blah, blah, blah. So there's literally, you cannot measure in $1980 and $1910. And we just haven't been able to catch up with it. So the whole trick is, what does this technological revolution mean? And the answer is, most people don't have any idea. But the elites, this is what I think happened with healthcare. I think they looked at Tower Records and Blockbuster and said, holy shit. Very soon, people will be walking around with maybe watches that are taking their pulse, and that if they have a heart attack, could call a car to pick them up automatically. And that'll kind of fuck us, because that'll stop. You see what I'm saying? The people in the healthcare industry saw where it was going and said, well, we got to.
Yeah, but it's just the bureaucratic stuff. I just honestly think that these are just systems that have, these are systems that these systems, people are, what you're getting at is that they're trying to protect their business models.
That's
right.
It's
like the wagon wheel. It's like the wagon wheel guys wanting to, boycotting against, the internal combustion engine. It's like cops voting, the police unions voting against ending the war on drugs, right? It's all the same thing. And it's the same thing in healthcare or any of these other industries. Is that they're worried about the business model change, but the business model change is going to happen anyway, whether they like it or not.
That's right.
The record industry is still trying to come to terms with intellectual property, movies and TV, and they're trying to shut down the Pirate Bay and this, that, and everything else. I got news for you: you're never going to do it. And the matter of fact, the more you try to, the less you get in the way of it, the more money you're going to make. Here's an interesting thing for you. The Mises Institute talked about this a lot, circa 2005, 2006, where they went ahead and they went and grabbed and got the copyrights and bought the copyrights for all the books in their library, and the ones that they couldn't get for free, where the copyright had expired or whatever. So they tracked down all the stuff that they wanted, and they put everything on the Mises Institute for free. Yeah. Everything.
Yep.
So you can get it all, right? And then they made all of Mises.org downloadable, and you could make Mises, Mises.org in Brazil or Switzerland or whatever, all of it, all available, and the whole thing, including audiobook versions and everything, and it's all free, PDFs, all of it, ebook versions, all of it, and you can still buy the physical copies of the books. And do you know that they made more money selling books than they ever did when they restricted the supply of the market? Because people do like to try before they buy.
Yes.
They do. And when it's something like that, when it's something they care about and something that changes their life and is important to them,
right,
and it has value to them, then they want to own a physical copy of it.
Yes. And so the whole trick here is
why the Patreon model works. It's why Kickstarter works. It's why all of this stuff works.
But
you give them agency, and you let people be invested in the production and the perpetuation of the thing that gives them and their lives meaning and brings value to their lives. And that's what's so important.
And the problem is, as much as I think scarcity is often a completely artificial created thing, in fact, the appearance of scarcity is what gives things value. And so, therefore, this is where the left always fails because they fail to look at this part of the equation. If you guarantee an income to everybody, if the income's good enough, nobody's ever going to do anything, right?
Right.
Like no one's ever going to.
You take away incentives. People only respond to incentives.
Well, right. Yeah, exactly right. So the trick needs to be, how do you balance the reality that scarcity is really over in a lot of ways? In other words, if you give somebody a house, right? You could get a neighborhood. We're going to give everybody a house, right? But then you go, well, the problem is Larry down the street, who we gave the house to, is really treating his house like shit, and he's right. So we go, okay, well, so I guess we got to set a rule. We're going to give you a free house, everybody, but you can't treat it like, you got to mow the lawn, right? You got to, right? And
but if he has no investment in it, he has no skin in the game. And Nassim,
right, that's what I'm saying.
Nicholas Nassim Taleb talks about this all the time. This is his latest thing: is skin in the game.
Yep.
is what makes the world go around. And it's the same thing with money creation. I've been arguing, this is why Austrians argued that it has to be tied to something real, where the creation of new monetary units has to come from previously produced human activity of some form or another. Someone has to have there has to be an opportunity cost to either produce money or produce something else. Because once that's been destroyed, then this is where this is where we're going to bring the Fight Club reference in now. Ready? You're going to love this one.
Right.
If there's one guy I could fight, I'd fight Milton Friedman.
Yeah.
Why? Because Milton Friedman was the libertarian. It was the status in libertarian. There's a status wolf in libertarian clothing, who as a monetarist and the Chicago School of Economics made the argument that we could do away with the lost capital of producing new monetary units by having competitive devaluing currencies constantly based on debt. He's the one that sold that to everybody. So if I could fight anybody, I'd go back in time and I'd beat the fucking shit out of Milton Friedman.
Well, and good, because as you know, the Russia thing was it was Harvard and University of Chicago. And I focus on the Harvard stuff mostly when I talk about it because I'm talking about the Clinton thing. But the University of Chicago stuff shows why this is a uniparty conspiracy, in the sense that Milton Friedman out of the right, the right of the right. You know, you can't get more right than Milton Friedman. 100% agreed. And it was the Clinton people, Summers and that Harvard group, left of the left, except the left doesn't think that, right? The left knows. You know, what's interesting, when I bring stuff up like this is why I say the left doesn't understand. When I bring stuff up with Garland, a lot of times I'll talk about something that I think is just absolutely common sense. Like, look, if you don't give people incentives, and the problem is, and I can name a zillion examples just of people whose adversity created their business idea or their art or whatever, right? In fact, that they would not have made this great album had they not been poor or whatever, right? You see what I'm saying? So adversity is actually often a better forge for growth and creativity than luxury, right? That's
going back to what I said earlier about this generation of young males who are getting ostracized at college right now.
That's right. And so the problem is, whenever I bring that up, Graham goes, "Well, you're blaming the poor," and I'm like, "Ooh, no, I'm not." I'm suggesting that if I were at McDonald's today, working at McDonald's, I'm an 18-year-old Lee Stranahan, and I'm not making a living wage. I'm making minimum, because I did this. I was 18. I lived in my car in California while I worked at McDonald's. If I were that same guy today, I would get with a few hours salary, even trying to eat and do everything else you have to do. If I were homeless today, but I had a job, I could buy a $39 Amazon tablet. In the meantime, I could go to the library for free, and I would learn some skills, but I'd be good at my job, and I would be out of that situation in like months. I would not be in that situation with any time at all. And I'm not special. Anybody could do that, and I'm not good looking. So if I were good looking, if I were attractive,
so there's no politician gonna be caught with Lee, the dead hooker.
No, that's right. No, I'm just saying, if you're attractive, if you're an attractive woman or man, then that waitering job's a lot easier to get, right? And
of course it is.
And you're going to make more money just by smiling, which I don't make any more money by smiling. And I'm just saying. But do you know what? That adversity has probably made me smarter. In other words, I can't rely on my looks, so I read. Right. You know, so
it's the argument of why a lot of people adversity. Everything is like, it's a right-handed world. I'm left-handed.
But if I
you learn it from a very young age, like that nothing in the world is built for you when you're left-handed.
So if I have that conversation with Garland, and if I approach it not politically, but like as a parent. Like, I realized it with my son, blah, blah, blah. He'd agree with me and he'd fill in his own story. But as soon as it goes to politics, the nascent Democrat in him kicks in. And he says, I'm blaming the poor. And
it's hard. Garland is an interesting, and I don't want to, Garland is an interesting case. And I like Garland. And I think he's about.
I love working, Yeah.
Yeah, no, he's a great guy. He's a great counterpoint to you and everything. And don't get me wrong. But Garland is a kind of a case study, I think, in some ways of someone who is still going through the process. And
yeah, right,
and
exactly.
The way you handle that is you just handle it very gently, and you just find non-political ways to have the discussion, and then just bring them along. As far as they're willing to be brought along. And sometimes you're going to run up against certain things in people. I've been doing this for years. I have friends of mine I have a friend of mine who's a brilliant guy, and brought himself up from nothing. Cuban immigrant, right? Is a lawyer today, and with abusive father and the whole nine yards, but fundamentally still a Marxist. I have argued with him. I mean, we're talking about like really high level, arguing Derrida, Sartre, John Barth, the whole nine yards.
Right.
That's the kind of shit that we would argue when we were in college, and still argue today. He's arguing Sartre, I'm arguing or Derrida, and I'm sitting there arguing Rothbard. And I'm like, and I've read them, and he's not read Rothbard. I'm like, dude, come on, that's not fair. Let's have a real discussion here. If we're going to do so, you need to understand my position. But he can't get through it because there's certain things that are just, these are certain things that are fundamental and foundational to their imprinting as people, and they want to believe otherwise. And this is a man who also, by the way, whose favorite book in the world is The Lord of the Rings, one of the great freaking texts of heroic texts of all times.
Yeah, right.
The Lord of the Rings is a brilliant piece of Catholic anarchism. It's like the Catholic anarchism Bible.
Right.
I mean, seriously, right? It's like the Bible rewritten from a Catholic anarchist point of view. It's a brilliant book, wonderful book. I dissed it for years because I didn't understand it, and now I read it and I'm like, oh my God, this is so heartbreaking. But it's just fascinating that these things exist within all of us. We are all a walking mass of contradictions at some level. And all you can do, and the best part is just stay positive. It doesn't matter who this is. We're talking about Garland, or we're talking about my friend, or whatever. You just always stay relatively positive, and always, when the conversion happens, never say "I told you so."
Yeah, well, that's
as hard as that is, because I am an asshole.
Well, see, but the problem is that it makes such good radio, though. So
it does make for good radio.
So I mean, the relationship Garland and I have is on the show. Now, as people who run the show, he and I get along extraordinarily well behind the scenes. We've never had a disagreement. Politically, we disagree on the stuff we disagree on, and that's why it's been very interesting that the Cavanaugh thing heated stuff up. Because we were just literally the same standards that I would use for evaluating Browder's testimony, I'm using to look at Kavanaugh's. I'm not using a separate set. That's why I mentioned the Moore stuff before. I didn't defend Moore ever. I said it seems credible to me because I was using the same tool set. So when I look at Ford's accusation, epistemologically, there's very little to respond to there. She doesn't have any proof at all. There's no case. You don't need to find contradictions. She's literally making no case. She names 4 people who were there. None of them corroborate her story in any way. She doesn't have a date. She doesn't have a location. And the reason she doesn't have those things is, I believe, if she had those things, she would have falsifiability. Where if I say no, I couldn't have committed the murder because I was at a restaurant. Okay, what restaurant? McDonald's. Well, now you can go to McDonald's and check the security cameras. But if I can't remember the name of the restaurant, then it becomes a much bigger search. And if I can't remember that I was at a restaurant, then it becomes almost impossible to the point where it's not falsifiable anymore. At least that's why the allegation, Keith Ellison's accuser's allegation, a zillion times stronger because it's falsifiable. I gave the medical records. Okay, let's look that up. There's literally not a single thing in Ford's testimony that you could check except we just have to take her word on it. And
this is something that their fear of losing the midterms is so palpable, and their fear of losing the Supreme Court forever is so palpable that they're willing to latch on to anything in order to keep and this is their last best hope for victory. Yeah. And I honestly believe that that they're all acting out of weakness. This to me just feels like pure weakness. It's certainly on the part of Soros, who's pushing this.
I think they're increasingly desperate, but it's the same cabal. I'm seeing the outlines of roughly the same people. All these connections between the DOJ, the Department of State, the Democratic National Committee, the media, right? And we know who some of their media people are by now. The Atlantic Council connected people, right? Because now all I do, like, if somebody new comes in, I just go, well, let me check their connection to the Atlantic Council. Oh yeah, they're a senior fellow there. Oh look.
Oh yeah, I'll look.
The recent one I did was, I didn't know about this. David Satter, who's a guy who's on the right. He was at PutinCon. He's part of not Heritage, but starts with an H. Another well-known neocon think tank, the Hudson Institute. Forgive, that's what it is. Hudson. David Satter's part of that. He's been on Center for Security Policy. Do you know who his roommate was at Oxford? Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton. Now, David Satter, when I look him up, he really never talks about that. If I was a guy on the right who went to school with Bill Clinton, I would be saying things all the time like, because I'm on the right, like, well, Bill Clinton used to cook eggs in front of me, and the way he cooked eggs, I know that he'll blah, 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 or whatever. Like some sort of rhetorical name-dropping that you'd use to good-naturedly go after the other side. He never mentions at all. He's a Russia expert. He was part of PutinCon, right? Yet he's got this connection going back to Clinton to Oxford and to Strobe Talbot, who fits in a lot of this stuff as well. And those guys are both Russian experts. What is David Satter's purpose in the propaganda war? Look it up. You'll be able to figure this out very quickly. He talks about two stories. Litvinenko, that's one of them. And the other one he talks about is the Chechen bombing. And like Bill Browder does not move around. He's always the Magnitsky story, right? That's his lane. Satter is always Litvinenko and the Chechen apartment bombing. He worked on a film with Andrei Nekrasov. After Andrei started changing his mind on Browder, suddenly David Satter, you can find a picture of Satter with Bill Browder, suddenly Satter starts attacking in print Nekrasov. So I asked Andrei, when we had him on the show, did Satter ever mention, because he worked with Satter for a long time, like knew him, interviewed him, right? I said, did he ever mention that Clinton-Oxford thing to you? And he's like, no. And so this is how they get you on the left and right. I'm fairly convinced at this point, clearly, Satter is part of the Khodorkovsky, Browder, which attaches him to Clinton, right? Because that's all those guys, right? Summers and all that group of people. Mm-hmm. But he's the guy on the right who makes the anti-Russian argument. Then you've got people on the left who make the anti-Russian argument. Perfect example is Michael Weiss, who's CNN, Daily Beast, Atlantic Council. Michael Weiss is everywhere. Mm-hmm. Who is he? Is he on the left or right? Well, he does not play to a right-wing audience, even though he's a neocon. He plays to CNN and Daily Beast. But there's a picture of him doing a rally with Pam Geller about 10 years ago. So, and I know where that funding comes from. And it's Israeli funding. And the reason I know that is because a guy who's a major conservative publisher out here said to me when I first came out to D.C., he said, you got to understand, look, the entire right is funded by about 5 people on the West Coast and East Coast. And they're all, is their one issue thing. Israel's their issue. It's people like Adelson and stuff like that. And he said, I pick up those checks and I understand. We're talking about the topic. This guy knows the Middle East really well. And I know, like I say, I know Huma and I know the Muslim Brotherhood issue and what people get wrong about the Muslim Brotherhood. The real story is the Saudi, the World League, the Muslim World League in Saudi Arabia. That's the real story. That's who Huma Abedin's directly connected to. She's connected to the Muslim Brotherhood. That's iffy. Muslim World League, 100% clear. And I was saying to him, I've been working on this story for a year, and for some reason I can't get any traction on it. They only want to talk about the Muslim World League. He said, it's this funding. He said, they don't want to hear anything about the Muslim World League. They just want to hear about the Muslim Brotherhood. It's all this Israeli funding. He said, I pick up the checks. You're correct about the story. but I'm not going to publish it, and neither will anybody. And I realized why I was getting stonewalled at Breitbart on some of my reporting about that.
Right. It makes sense, though.
Once you hear that from somebody who does not have an axe to grind, he's not like, those darn Jews, right?
Right.
He, I could be Jewish now that I think about it. But he was being just realistic with me because he knew I knew the issue. And then once I started to look at the Mercer funding of Breitbart and everything else, and the connections to AIPAC and everything, I started to go, okay. And I'm not anti-Israel in the sense that, like, again, those darn Jews, I understand why Israel should exist and everything else, but stop being dicks, right? And that would be good. And it does connect a lot of the oligarchs were Jewish and went to Israel afterwards. It all connects to the other big part of the story. But once you understand that right media is really controlled by Israel money, you understand why no one talks about the MEK on the Iran side, on the right, which to a grassroots right-wing audience, the Peoples Mujahideen being supported by Bolton and Giuliani, there's no way I could go to a MAGA crowd and go, okay, everybody, look, I'm going to tell you who we're going to support. How does this sound? It's called the People's Mujahideen. Now, I know there's a hammer and sickle in that thing because they started as a Marxist group. And they're right. And suddenly the crowd goes, no, I'm getting boos and jeers, right?
Right.
This is literally who Rudy Giuliani and John Bolton want to run Iran.
I know. And I know. I know. It's driving me up a wall.
Well, so, but see, this is the explanation. Because the right-wing media, who Breitbart makes reference to the MEK, they never talk about it. So again, one of the beautiful things about working for Russia is when they don't tell me what to say and they actually don't have a dog in that one. Because if they do, I don't know about it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Like, because look, Russia deals with Israel, right? It's not like Putin's like, you know what I mean?
Putin has a great relation. Putin has developed a very good relationship with Israel, even though he's got an Israeli fifth column within the Kremlin.
So, if anything, the way we talk about Israel on the show, I think Putin would be, hey guys, slow down a little, because Garland really hates Netanyahu, like really hates him.
Oh, so do I. I think he's a war criminal.
But you know what I'm saying? Putin would be like, if we were controlled by Putin, he'd be going, dudes, come on, I'm trying to work with the guy. What are you doing? Right. Well, what are you doing?
No, I mean, it's so obvious that Putin does not run Russia and Russian media the way that it's laid out in the Western press. It's all just genetic fallacy stuff. Oh, you work for Putin. You work for Russia, so anything you have to say does not matter. I'm like, yeah, actually, I know I'm over the target, taking flack, because I'm getting a whole bunch of, it's got to be Soros-funded trolls writing comments for my blog. They're all from the same IP address.
Yeah, right.
And they're all different. Yeah, and they're all trying to, because I write for Strategic Culture Foundation now, which is a Moscow-based think tank. Right. I mean, I'm upfront about this. I mean, yeah, it's like, are you kidding? I worked my ass off to get exposed, to get picked up by Russian media, because they're the only ones who are going to pay me to write what I want to write about.
Well, the other thing, because I said, like I said on the Browder story, I'd love to have an hour with Trump. I'd love to have an hour with Putin.
Oh yeah, who wouldn't?
And I can't. There's no mechanism.
Right. You work for Sputnik and you don't have that mechanism.
No, right. There's literally there's no coordination with RT. There's all this stuff with Sputnik and RT. This is not a propaganda. When I hear it's called a propaganda operation, and I work there.
Look, they're both biased, but they wear their bias on their sleeve. But it's pretty obvious. But they still report facts. They still report more facts than the freaking New York Times does.
That's right. And the bias often is but I know firsthand. Like, look, I'll give you a perfect example. If I were Russia, I would hire some attractive person to be the spokesman on issues like Browder, who speaks impeccable English, maybe with a hint of a Russian accent, right? And I would media train them, and I would have that person be out front to be available for interviews and blah, blah, blah. There's nobody like that right now. I'm not even talking propaganda. I'm just talking basic media relations. So
I mean, they don't. I mean, the only one. I mean, it was Peskov who put the Browder name in his his thing, right? It's it was.
And by the way, maybe my strategy's wrong. Maybe it should be an older guy in a suit. I'm just saying I don't care about the tactics. There's literally no coherent English speaking spokesperson, right?
Right. Think about this. Think about this for a second. Like I mean, it was quick. I was not surprised at all when Strategic Culture contacted me to start writing for them, and they were upfront. They said we're a Moscow-based think tank. I was like, okay, that's cool. And I said the only problem I had was trying to figure out how much I should charge them per article, right?
Yeah.
Which was fine. I checked with a couple of people and we talked about it for a minute, which was great. But what they were looking for is obvious. If you look at Strategic Culture, what they're looking for is they're looking for English-speaking and American and European writers who are sympathetic to a pro-Russian, to telling Russia's side of the story. Not necessarily a pro-Russia side of the story, just telling Russia's side of the story.
Yeah.
So that's why they have people like myself, Alistair Crook, Jim Jatras, and others, right?
Or just not lying. Or just not.
No, they're just not lying. You've got former British and U.S. ambassadors, writing for a Moscow-based think tank because that's how bad things are.
Yeah.
Because they can't get a job. They can't, send that stuff to Town Hall or Amcon Mag or anything else where they should be able to sell that stuff and get it published because those guys are all in the tank. Well, it's crazy.
And that's why I'm closer now to people like George Galloway, a lefty, former MP, who, when I was in England a few weeks ago after I went to Helsinki, I had dinner and hung out with Galloway. Love that guy, man. Love that guy.
Right.
And it's because he's just he's fundamentally a truth teller on this stuff. And we talked about the Russia thing because he does stuff with Russia too. And we both know, I mean, it's just like you'd have to work there to fully appreciate it. Which is a guy like that guy, Andrew Feinberg, who made all the media when he quit he was fired from Sputnik. He's a lazy guy who didn't want to work. And I knew because I was around at the time before I worked at Sputnik. I saw what happened with him. But to read about us is like, oh, we're propaganda, blah, blah, blah. It's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I work there and I tell people, you're welcome to take the metro in with me every morning. See how the show is produced as long as you want to. Right. Until you eventually go, yeah, Lee's telling the truth. He and Garland put the show together completely on their own. They pick their own topics. And the only thing is I'm not hostile to the idea that Putin's not Satan. Does that make sense? In other words, I didn't have to sign a loyalty oath. They didn't say, hey, well, what do you think of Putin? The more I've independently researched on my own, the more I've realized that this is a Khodorkovsky financed lie, because Khodorkovsky desperately wants Putin out of the way so they can go back to fleecing Russia like they did in the 90s. 100% clear. Khodorkovsky admits as such. He wants a right? He's very clear.
Yeah, that's all this is. That's all this is about.
And by the way, he's also very clear about buying politicians. There's quotes. Right. This guy's not dishonest, kind of. You know what I mean?
No, he's not dishonest. He's just
kind of. Right, yeah, right. He said, I like buying politicians. He's learned to shut up about that stuff. He's learned to be the human rights hero, like Soros and Browder, right? And that's the way he's viewed. But it's 100% clear, and it's right there in the law. And I always mention to people Senate Resolution 322 in 2006. Look it up, Senate Resolution 322. It's the in favor of Mikhail Khodorkovsky Act. And it was introduced by Joe Biden and had two co-sponsors in 2006, Barack Obama and John McCain. That's it for the co-sponsors. So every presidential candidate in 2008 was on Team Khodorkovsky. That's stunning. Wouldn't you think that the media, in terms of covering the 2008 election, would have gone, well, this is interesting. Turns out both candidates.
Yeah, both candidates are pro-Russian, deposed Russian oligarch for some reason.
Yes.
They wouldn't even because they don't want to touch it because then somebody would actually run the counter story. See, here's the thing. The reason they didn't touch it because they didn't want Breitbart running the counter story. Because they could have spun it as, Khodorkovsky is the great Russian deposed oligarch, and now he funds humanitarian movements and blah, blah,
Right.
blah, blah, and all this stuff. They could have spun it that way, and then there would have been Breitbart or Fox News or whatever, would immediately just abreacted and take the other side of the story.
That's right.
In order to, right, up to a point.
The thing I tell people all the time is listen very carefully to what they're not telling you. The first story I covered as a journalist was the Edwards story, when I was doing comedy at HuffPost. And I noticed that John Edwards had been caught coming out of the Beverly Hilton and had hid from reporters in a bathroom at like 3 a.m. and had called the Beverly Hills police to get him out of the bathroom. And I said to my wife, honey, if I was caught at a hotel at 3 a.m. and I hid in the bathroom and called the police, would you have some questions for me about why I was there? And she said, yeah. And I said, okay, so that's common sense, right? I'm not alone in that. I called the Beverly Hills police. They confirmed for me that Edwards, I said, I was doing comedy, but I didn't have to tell them that. Hi, my name's Lee Stranahan with the Huffington Post. Did you guys actually get John Edwards out of the bathroom? Yeah, we did. Okay, so that's confirmed. And then I watched it evolve, and I noticed that not a single website on the left was even talking about the fact that this had happened to Edwards and that he really owed an explanation. Then the next press conference he did, rather than taking questions, he ran out the back. And I started to go, well, that seems a little suspicious to me. And I said, why is no one on the left covering this? And I was writing for Daily Cause at the time, too. And I started writing about it at HuffPost and Daily Cause. I said, well, it's pretty obvious to me he's having an affair. I said, I've been married a couple times. I've cheated. I said, I'm not criticizing him for that. But I didn't do it when I was running for president. And I said, so if John Edwards comes out and he just says, you know what? I made a mistake. I love my wife. I'm going to go bake bread for a couple of years with the monks. Then he could come back and everyone on the left would forgive him because they forgave Bill Clinton, right? So turns out that's not what happened. He didn't, it took weeks of him before he admitted it. And that's a whole nother train ride. But that was my first story. And I learned how the media just lies to people by ignoring stories that don't fit the narrative until they can't possibly ignore them, like when Edwards admitted to it. And even then, they don't really cover it. So I'm this, amateur reporter talking to people at the New York Times and talking to people who knew about, the Edwards story. Again, I know more about the Edwards story than probably anyone on earth because I talked to the woman who Riel Hunter talked to the day after she slept with John Edwards. And I interviewed the lawyer who paid, he's now passed away, blah, blah, blah. So I got all these interviews and everything. And I'm like, this is a pretty big story because, he's being talked about for attorney general, right? Because he was at the time, right? And no one else seemed to understand it. And then once he admitted it, and even then he didn't admit that it was his child, that took another month or two. And I saw this with the Wiener story when I worked on that. Boy, if they want to ignore a story, they can ignore a story. And and that's the single biggest way. It's like that Andrew and I used to talk about this. It's like that sucking sound at the beach before a tsunami. That part where all the water goes out, right? And all the animals get freaking out, right? So if you're just on the beach at that point, you look and you go, hey, the waves pulled out. Oh, look, we can walk a long way out in the water. Let's go out, Tom. Come on. And that's when you get hit, right?
Right.
But if you know how to read the news, when a story's big and everyone's ignoring it, it's a really big story.
Yes.
It's huge, that they realize the implications of it. Mm-hmm. And what I said,
they just ignore it completely because they are the keepers of the status quo. They're not there to upset the apple cart at all.
And I was at least honest enough in my first. I recently reread my first Edwards story, and I said, "Let's be," because I was getting in Democrat Daily Cause. They kicked me off Daily Cause for saying that Edwards is having an affair, and Marcos, the guy who runs Daily Cause, said that my video that I made on YouTube in 2007 was the best political video of the year. He said that in Reason magazine. He said that on Cause. So I'm a guy who Marcos sees the best political video of the year. 6 months later, I'm thrown off the site. Turns out Elizabeth Edwards had written the foreword to Marcos's new book. right? And so that's why suddenly I was persona non grata at Daily Cause. But they didn't throw me off Huffington Post, and I kept reporting. But even in that first article, I said, let's be honest, fellow Democrats. If this were a Republican coming out of the hotel, this would be all over the media, because it would have been. There's no doubt. And I knew it at the time, and this is why when Andrew, when I first interviewed him, he'd researched me, and he could see that at least I wasn't completely full of shit. That at least like I was honest enough to recognize that. And boy, it bugs me when people don't, because it's a game. The other thing I don't like about the Democrats in this area is it's all a fucking game to them. To them, it's a game. Like that Clintonian.
Well, they don't believe it, because Lee, they don't believe in anything.
No,
they're nihilists.
Well, no, that's
going back to it.
Andrew used to talk about that all the time, and you can see it. The ultimate one to me is the Clinton. It depends on what the meaning of the word is.
Yeah.
That is, I get the game, Bill. I'm smart too. I understand that you can parse, you can have an intellectual argument about something to the point where you removed all meaning
from all the words.
We
can just Chomsky this stuff down to its bare minimums. And like, no, dude, I'm not playing that game. And this is where, this is a discussion for another day about, the left brain and the right brain and all this stuff. But yeah, it's very obvious where all this, begins and all this stuff ends. So we are at the 3-hour mark.
Oh, there you go. You said we're talkative.
I was going to say, a bunch of chatterboxes. So Lee, I think this is a good place to stop.
Okay.
I most likely will break this up into a couple of pieces, but this has been fantastic. We'll do this again and trying to keep it under 3 hours, but that's fine. I really enjoyed it.
No, it's been great for me too, Tom. Like I said, Tom, we love having you on the show, and I think you're and you and I obviously we know we can make a lot of the same references, so I think it's easy for us to.
And I do want to say that you are the only person I have ever met who got my handle, my Twitter handle. They got the reference.
The THX.
You got it. THX 1138.
Yeah.
I'm like, Lee's a lot sharper than I even gave him credit for before. All right, that's kind of cool.
Well, I get that. I will be honest. I get that problem because I used to work at Breitbart. And so for a lot of people, if they hear Breitbart reporter, they go, they have so many negative things they've heard about Breitbart. We've had this with a lot of people on the left have said, even Garland and a lot of people have been guessing. Like, when I first heard you were a Breitbart reporter, I thought you'd be a complete stupid asshole, basically. And then they're like, turns out you're not a complete stupid asshole. Right. And they're always shocked by it, but it's tricky. I keep adding, so, when I go from Breitbart to Sputnik, that's not.
It's like jumping out of the frying pan and going into the fire at this point.
In a sense, but it's given me the ability to tell the truth on Russia and to research it. If I had been at Breitbart, like I say, they never would have let me. They killed my research on Andrew. They killed my research on the Shirley Sherrod story, which is a story for another day. But they wouldn't let me research that, and I found the thing that devastated the story and actually helped them win the lawsuit, the Shirley Sherrod lawsuit, which was that she'd lied in her speech. It's a whole long thing. But they wouldn't let me, when I was working there, they were like, no, leave that alone, leave that alone. Then the first time I quit, I researched, and I'm like, well, this justifies, I'm like, this is a game changer. So I don't like being restricted.
Well, it's interesting, and I'll tell you something else. There was the last thing, and then we're going to talk about this, which is why Sputnik and RT are both so important, because they're actually trying to tell the truth, some version of the truth that's not the tightly controlled half truth of the Western media. If you look at their website rankings, and you look at the growth of both of those news sources, you'll see exactly why that is. Yeah. The world is looking for real information. Sputnik is one of the biggest websites in the world now, and I know that the managing editor over there. I watched or read an interview with her a couple of years ago, and she said, "No, we had a plan to target and how to build this brand," and she was very adamant about, we're going to tell the truth, as ugly as it is. We're just going to tell the truth as best as we can. Now we're going to package it however we need to for our audience, but we're going to tell the truth. And and you're well placed. You know, I think I look at where you are and I say to him, okay, Lee's really well placed. And I've been on the mothership a couple of times. I've been interviewed by Radio Sputnik Moscow a couple of times. And most recently, like last weekend. It was about Lavrov's speech at the UN General Assembly. And I'm like, so, love to be on again. And if you could point me in the direction how I can get paid I can get the paid article on the front page. I need to speak to somebody in editorial. I need that opportunity. I need that name because that's the next step for me. I don't know about you, but that's definitely the next step for me. So,
well, it's straight. It's like I said, they've been great. My boss, media boss, Mindia, is a great guy, great boss. And he's a reporter, and he's an editor, but he's done real reporting. And so he and I talk as peers when it comes to reporting. He knows, but I defer to, he knows stuff that I don't know at all. You know what I mean?
Sure. Fair enough.
And so I've learned a lot from just being like here's a perfect example of how fair he is. When I first asked him about Ukraine, I was trying to figure out the Yanukovych thing. So I don't know anything about this. So was the Western media, he was corrupt. So was he corrupt? Now, the answer he could have given me is no, he's blah, blah, blah. He said, yes, of course he's corrupt.
Right.
He said the problem is they're all corrupt.
Right.
And everyone I've talked to since then who hates Russia but pro, Ukrainian, they all agree. They're all corrupt, right? So that's a factual statement. He could have given me the Russian propaganda line, which I don't even know what that is. But all he did was...
No, I mean, even Putin said that. Even Putin said, Putin has never even said anything nice about Yanukovych. All he's ever said was he was the rightfully elected representative of the Ukrainian people. And that if you want to have a revolution, then if you want to depose him, then you do it through legal means.
It turns out like
and he would have supported that.
I know 100%. He's never said anything, and that you try to say that to people, they go, well, Manafort was pro-Russian. It's like, no, he wasn't. He told the Party of Regions to move away from, and this was reported by the New York Times all before these lies started, and the lies are partially. I've said to people, look, you can't understand this. If you think Russiagate is about getting Trump, you're wrong. It's about getting Putin. Trump is along the way. He's important, but the actual goal here is Putin because he is often the only thing that stands in the way. And his thing is he's nobody's puppet. So
truly nobody's puppet.
And Yeltsin was inarguably, nobody thinks that he was not America's puppet, basically going along. Everybody knows that. Everybody freely admits it. But then they don't go, well, wait a minute. Why didn't we, when Putin was, didn't he, I know that Putin, we say he's a fascist, he's a bad guy, but when Yeltsin was in, did I remember correctly that he brought tanks to the parliament? Hang on. Because go look it up.
Yeah.
Yeltsin.
Yeah. No.
Right.
It's fun. It's fascinating, right? Can
you imagine if Putin had done that?
Putin he doesn't govern that way.
No.
It's in the same as he doesn't govern that way at all. He's actually trying he's actually he walked into a terrible situation, had to effectively run the whole thing himself, right? Yeah, he had to jail people. He had to out fifth columnists and the Kremlin was a mess.
Yes.
But slowly over the course of time, what he's been doing is building the Russian political system to be a functional one that will function without him. It's not there yet.
Yeah. No.
But he's actually encouraging it.
And we'd clearly love to have a better relationship with the U.S. I think they're just dealing with their own stuff. I think that they don't like us. Clearly, they don't like the hypocrisy from the U.S. on talking about human rights and stuff like that, but then we're supporting the white helmets.
We're talking about, they have described us as not agreement capable. And there's a particular phrase that both Lavrov and Putin have used, and it translates a particular way, but the Russian speakers have talked about it, Dmitry Orlov, the Saker, and others talk about that phrase. It's particularly devastating because it's a pejorative. It's got pejorative connotations.
This goes back to what I was saying about them being bad at propaganda, though. If Sputnik and RT were being managed as propaganda, as a PR thing, right? What you would do is, which they're not, they're actually run as news bureaus.
Right.
If you were doing it as propaganda and you were trying to get a point, you'd analyze it. You'd go, we realize very few people know about Khodorkovsky. So they would come in and go, hey guys, we need to be doing a Khodorkovsky segment every week. Because when I've worked at Newsplate, that's what they do. Hey guys, we're going to hit this, they said at Breitbart. So everyone look for stories about this, right? Look for Cavanaugh stories, whatever, right? That's what we're focusing on. They've never done that, which tells me that they're actually running a news bureau and not going, because if you sit down in a room, you go, you know what? If we could change Americans so they knew who Khodorkovsky was, let's say, and we could make an even 5% dent in that, that's probably enough of a dent to really make some changes. And they go, boy, it's pretty provable case against him, but they don't do that. And that's why I say it's very, very interesting working there, because when they go to propaganda, blah, blah, I go, no, and in a sense, I almost go, like, I wish, because if they came in and said to me, hey, we're trying to figure out how to go after Khodorkovsky, I'd be like, great, got a lot of ideas on that.
Right, exactly.
Got a ton, ready to go.
Yeah, and so it's really, what's really interesting is that the story is so badly handled that it's the alternative American and European press that's actually building the case against them on their own. So you have people like myself and Lucy Armstrong and yourself and all these people now building that zeitgeist, that burbling that burbling cauldron is it's simmering now. We're getting to that point, and it's going to break. So.
I figured out Browder on my own, looking at stuff, starting to research, going, what I mean by on my own is no one at Sputnik was like, hey, you should really look into this Bill Browder guy, or Lee, you need to look into Bill Browder. No one mentioned his name at all. And at the time, there was so few people talking about him that the thing that helped me was an interview with Anna Krasov that I had to find through a search. It turned out from Brian Becker at Sputnik. And so I was able to talk to Brian, and I spent about 4 or 5 months just researching, shutting my mouth about Browder. I told my boss, I said, I'm researching this guy. I don't want to say anything till I really have a handle on the story. Mm-hmm. Right now, things are looking dicey in certain areas, but I'm going to shut my mouth. Then I started talking about it, but I'd done like months of research with no help at all, just trying to figure out the story. And then once we started to get Andre on the show and Alex on the show and Lucy on the show, it all really started to be like, okay, now we got a cohesive story that we can retell that makes sense to people. Then the other big thing was Natalia Veselnitskaya giving me Bill Browder's video deposition, because I knew even though the deposition was in print, seeing Browder say things I knew was in this age, you need that. And so she sent me the video files of the deposition. I immediately posted it all on YouTube. Unedited, here's the whole thing. Just trying to lay out, like, look, here's a resource, boom. Because it did not exist before. That was not, that was nowhere. And it's the same reason I'm talking to this whistleblower, Andrei Telitchenko. A lot of times I'll read other people's reporting or see what other people are doing and then go, okay, what's the next step in this story that would make somebody who's skeptical be able to figure out the truth? Like, here's video of the whistleblower. I see him saying it in a quote in Politico, but now I'm seeing a guy, okay? Or now I'm seeing Browder. So a lot of what I've tried to do is just make resources available even.
Right.
And then now it's a matter of, but then I continue to do research. It's been really interesting the way the story's played out. But boy, I now believe that if you don't understand the Browder story, like you can't understand. I see reporters like Sarah Carter, who I like and I think does a lot of very good work.
Right.
Or Chuck Ross over at Daily Caller, who I like a lot. I've talked to, who does very good work. And they don't get the Browder thing. And because they don't get the Browder thing, they don't get the story. They get parts of it, but then they get dragged down a rabbit hole. But on the other hand, Hillary and Uranium One,
which is irrelevant.
Well, it's actually relevant because the story. Do you know who they represent?
Well, I mean, it's relevant, but it's not germane.
No, it actually is germane because do you know who? Because there's a guy who testified under oath. The mistake everybody makes in Uranium One is they confuse Russia with Russians. They confuse Russia. Every Russian is Russia, which by people when they say Russia now they mean Putin. So when they hear that money was paid by Russia, they think it's Putin. Well, the money was paid to APCO, who's Khodorkovsky's. So even if you look at Uranium One, there's an accusation of money being paid by Russia for lobbying. That money went to APCO. That means it's Khodorkovsky. That's what that means. Because because APCO's not going to represent Khodorkovsky and Putin at the same time, right?
No, absolutely not.
So that story, actually, when you drill down on it, and you go and you understand who APCO is, which is a PR firm Jonathan Weiner's with, and who's closely associated with John McCain, and who's closely associated with Mikhail Khodorkovsky. In fact, the founder of APCO is on the board of the Institute for Modern Russia. So that's as close as you can get, right? And decades-long relationship. I mean, like 15 years or something. Long relationship. Going back to when Khodorkovsky's in prison. So 10, 15 years. Once you get that relationship, you go, oh, we're being told Uranium One completely wrong. And it's a way to trick the right into hating Putin. See?
Right.
And they hate Hillary. So let's convince them that Hillary sold Russia 20% of the uranium. Well, all the facts are, no, we didn't, and blah, 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 and the uranium didn't leave. But also it's actually covering up the APCO connection. And that's what I find fascinating. See, the Khodorkovsky team, man, they get PR. Khodorkovsky and Browder, you guys are listening to this, I'm sure you are. Fantastic work. Love your stuff. Very impressed. Yeah. I understand PR. Very good. But there's more of us than there are of you. And so the story keeps coming out. But yeah, there you go.
And that's probably the best place to end. There are more of us than there are of you.
There you go.
Lee Stranahan, dude, loved it. Enjoyed every minute of it.
Cool. Yeah, me too.
3 hours and 15 minutes. So we'll do this again sometime. And, really appreciate it, your time and your expertise and everything else, because, this is what we need to do. We need to build stronger relationships amongst this community in order to help support each other's work.
100% agree, and that's been a lot on my mind lately, and I 100% agree. Could not 1,000% agree. All right, man. Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you. You have a great afternoon.
You too. Bye.